Weather outside is getting nice.
It is.
Which is good. Mowed the lawn for the first time this spring last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That
great.
fresh cut smell in the air. It just gives me a sense of anticipation. You know what I mean?
Hello and welcome to the Resilient Lineage podcast, where we reflect on the past, anticipate the future, and discover what God is up to today. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Milo. And I mowed my lawn last week. I don't think I have to mow it this week. We're still on the front end of it's
But then
spring.
I'll mow it the next week.
But then you're going to mow it.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the chores
I do.
I'm giving you.
Thanks.
If you want to live here.
I got you. Free rent, right? But
yeah.
It comes with a cost.
Free isn't free. It costs somebody something.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Part 2.
Yeah.
Part 2 of this podcast where we're looking at how do you discover community.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like, and how to do that well. We last week, if you missed the last podcast or you're new to the podcast, welcome. We're really glad you're here. Hopefully you are listening because a friend shared it with you. If you just discovered us out of the blue, we're grateful for that. We want you to plug in, and hopefully you'll find this beneficial.
Yes.
What we'd love for you to do is, particularly with the last week's episode and this episode, where we're talking about community and how do you discover that? How do you cultivate that in your life? How do you set yourself up for success? Last week we shared some stats about where folks are at and being connected. Mm-hmm. Found something else that said teenage depression and hopelessness are setting new annual records. Young people say that having a close friend has plummeted, where people just don't even have a sense of belonging like they used to. Why do you think that is? I mean, based upon, you're a senior in high school, you walk the hallways, you got a job where you got a lot of people you work with that are around your age. You're plugged into church and other social settings. What do you think is in the way of people getting a sense of community, just from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, like what we mentioned last week, I think COVID had a lot to do with it.
Okay.
Especially in the education system. People got away with a lot when they were doing virtual classes. I know for our school, if you had a better grade the semester before we all shut down, you would get that grade.
Oh, so if let's say I'm taking math.
Performance and effort and willing to do the hard and nitty gritty stuff just stopped.
So if I got a B in math last semester and this semester I'm not doing too good, I got a C minus, I'll get a B. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
Because they kind of, they're we don't know the severe.
I remember having that conversation with you and your brother. We are not doing that.
Dad was like, you were going to get an A if you had a B last semester. We are going to put in the work. And I think that just brought a wave of, if I don't have to do it, I won't do it. No one's asking me to do this.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of misconception right now. I think maybe misconception isn't the right word. I mean, perhaps it is, but I think it's maybe better to say people's expectations are not in a healthy and reasonable place. Mm-hmm. So people expect things to go a certain way that isn't reasonable.
Yeah. And then social media platforms, that's really contributed a lot, especially TikTok, that became really popular 2019. And then a lot of people got very successful on there. So I think a lot of teenagers are if I just post this many a day, one day I'll be there. And it's just...
It isolated them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think...
I'm not saying that's the only cause, but
it's a cause.
It's a cause. That's what I've seen. And so... and now you see the effects. People aren't as in a strong community. People don't want to make friends. People are isolated. People, the effort isn't as
I think there's along with all of that, I think there's a false belief that if I'm part of community, the community's there for me. I mean, the community should be there for you, but this isn't about you exclusively either. Like being a part of a community means that there's some measure of your preferences that you have to be prepared and willing to lay aside. And I think there's I like last week we laid out, what are the qualities of a community you're looking for? And I think, folks need to kind of come to a pretty tight list of what those non-negotiables are. But like, there's other things that like, darn, a big deal. Like negotiate those things away. I see a lot of, I see a lot of folks. It's probably an exaggeration. I see folks that are desperately lonely. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that when they do step into community, they try to make it all about them. They think they are the bee's knees.
Cream of the crop.
I don't know why we say that, bee's knees. It's an old-timey phrase. They think they're like hot stuff, right? And they, everybody should be happy that they're there. And it's like they're not there
for you.
They're not there to strengthen or benefit the gathering. They're there to be noticed. They're there to be appreciated. They're there to be people to be interested in them. So I think that's an expectation thing. That's not the role of community. It can provide those things. I mean, if, you're having a birthday party, it's reasonable. The birthday party.
It's not about you, Linda.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that from?
I don't know.
That just sounds like a movie quote or something. But as you said that, like that sounds like a line that would be like in the Office or the show Community, or Parks and Rec, right?
Parks and Rec.
Which what's funny is when you watch those shows, a lot of those shows were about the dysfunctions of all these people, the idiosyncrasies of these people still coming together for the purposes of community being realized, right? Okay, well, last week we talked about identifying, the qualities that you should want in a community, and we laid out the qualities that we've laid out as a household, what we've done, which I think is at minimum is an example of what it could look like. Feel free to take any of those and use them as you see fit. So as we said, at the beginning, if you haven't listened to this first part of the podcast, that's fine. We're not going to reference a ton back to that one. But these two are intended to go together because what we're suggesting in this idea of how do you cultivate a sense of community, and this is not an exhaustive set of practices, but it's at least a good starter. Is your phone buzzing?
It is. Let me put it on mute real quick.
But that, the first one was that you got to identify the qualities of what you want in a community. The second was to step into different environments that make up a well-rounded community. And then the third is be candid with yourself. So we're going to focus on those second and third things today. Step into the environments that make a well-rounded community. So this is informed. There's a book I read years ago called Faith in Real Life. Have you ever heard of that book? It's written by a guy by the name of Mike Tatlock.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah. So Mike used to be, he is the lead pastor at Grace Chapel, but I used to be on staff at that church, good family friend. And he does a fantastic job in that book of laying out different settings for like community to take place. And he talked about the park, coffee shop, and living room. So the park is where you have fun. The coffee shop is where you have meaningful discussions. And the living room is where you share, the intimate details of your life with one another. So some of this thinking is based on that. And I've kind of adapted it a little bit more broadly than those settings, because that was very specific to the Northwest, like park, coffee. Because Portland, Oregon in particular, there's like lots of parks in the areas. All these little, when we say coffee shop, like Starbucks is where you go if there's not like a legit coffee shop, right? That's the attitude out there. So what I've kind of laid out is these environments that I've been thinking through probably the last 10 years or so, in my understanding of what it looks like to cultivate well-rounded community and what my expectations should be. So, for example, and then even looking at the life of Christ, how did Christ do this? How did he build a well-rounded community? So let's kind of walk through, I'm going to kind of hit these.
Go ahead.
And then we'll walk through them individually. So the first is shoulder to shoulder. The second is head to head. And the third is heart to heart. So the first is shoulder to shoulder. So this is a type of environment where you accomplish something with someone else. Mm-hmm. You are going to work later today.
Yeah.
At the Jesus Chicken Shop.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. That's a shoulder to shoulder activity. Like, how well do you know the people that are there? Just out of curiosity.
It's not like I'm not hanging out with them
outside of work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But would you say there's a sense of community there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Because
I know the people who got my back, and I know the people I got their back.
And you probably know who doesn't have your back.
Yes.
I mean,
people probably know that I don't have their back.
It goes both ways.
It does.
So there's a sense of community, right? Mm-hmm. That because you're doing something with one another, what kind of gathers that community is the shared interest of we all have a job
and we all have a goal.
Right?
This is what we're trying to make, and if you're not being quick enough, someone will come in for a good 15 minutes, help you out.
Yeah.
And we will make this.
Yeah. Help make up the slack. And,
yeah.
Yeah. And then get moving forward.
It's definitely a shoulder to shoulder moment.
Yeah.
It's not something I can just, hey, how are you doing today? And it be at the same pace in the right environment.
Yeah. That's not the objective.
Yeah.
It's like I remember when I worked for your papa, my dad, when I worked for, him in construction, there was guys I would work with during the summer. I would say we were friends and we produced some great work, good quality work that is lasting to this day. Right. But if I couldn't tell you their spouses' names, I couldn't tell you how many kids they had. I couldn't tell you what their interests and hobby, maybe a few of them I could tell you their interests and hobbies. Because maybe you talk about that during your lunch break or something. Yeah. But I could tell you they're a good craftsman. Mm-hmm. I could tell you about their work ethic.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a sense of gauging those folks based upon what are we accomplishing with one another. Yeah. So there's that shoulder to shoulder piece. I don't know if you've ever experienced this where you've worked with somebody for an extended period of time and you know their first name, but you don't know their last name, but you would consider them a friend.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like best friends, but you'd kind of go if I saw that person pulled over on the side of the road and had a flat tire, I'm going to stop and make sure they're okay and see if they need help. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I'm going to be friendly towards them.
Yeah.
I'm going to wave at them if I see them in traffic. If I ran into them at the grocery store, I'd introduce them to my family. It's a known person.
Yeah.
But to know them well is, well,
different.
Yeah, it's different. Mm-hmm. So that's shoulder to shoulder, where you the focus is accomplishing something together. And this is all going somewhere. So I want to kind of walk through these things. I'm going to tie it all in together. Mm-hmm. So the second is head to head. So this is where you're learning and growing with one another. And so kind of a typical setting for something like this would be like in a classroom type setting.
Yeah. School.
Yeah. So you're in school right now. If you're doing, if you're plugged into a church and you're doing Bible study with one another, it could be, there's maybe you go to a class of some kind, like a cooking class in the evenings, or you go to, you're learning and growing in a particular area, not to necessarily become like an expert at it. Mm-hmm. Although that could be the case.
Right.
But it might not be attached to a vocation or producing a thing on the other side, but you are exposed to someone as you're learning this thing with one another, which is there's a type of intimacy that's experienced in that because you have to be vulnerable to one another to learn in that environment with one another.
Yes.
It's like your mom and I still can't believe she did this. When we lived in North Carolina, we learned how to scuba dive. And I said, your mom hates swimming. Like she just is terrified of the water. And it was because of, our friends, Tim and Jan Stelma, who owned the dive shop, that she was willing. She trusted Tim. She didn't trust me. She trusted Tim to, step into this learning experience. What was interesting about that, as we were going through our classes, we were going through those classes with other folks we didn't know at all, but we became friendly with. We were doing something with one another, but we were all learning with one another. So it's like, I don't understand this word. What does that mean? What is this part of the regulator, and how do you put this on? And like, there's this vulnerability that you have to demonstrate if you're going to learn.
Yeah.
And I would say, when you step into those learning environments, the more vulnerable you're willing to be, the faster you're going to learn.
This is very true.
And if you're hesitant to be vulnerable, then you're probably not going to connect with folks in that environment. And you are probably not going to gain a sense of community in that environment. Because, there's sort of this I would argue there's sort of an unspoken expectation that we are all learning. If you pretend to know more than you do, then you're not setting...
Yeah.
You're not setting us up for success. I can see this. So I'm an instructor right now as part of my job. And so I teach the same course 2 or 3 times a month. And it's fascinating to watch the dynamics of the room change based upon who's in the room. And this posture of being willing to grow and learn and be open and vulnerable and like, I don't know this, but I'm curious and I want to know what this could look like, changes the atmosphere. And versus if people are closed off, they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to, nobody wants to look stupid, but that's a priority for them. They don't want to look like a fool. Then like the classroom dynamic is miserable for everybody.
Yeah.
Because it becomes the atmosphere. It doesn't matter what we're instructing the course. We are the exact same instructors every single week. It's the same material. It's the same, like we're bringing the same amount of energy. Sometimes we have to bring more if that's the posture of the group. So anyway, my point is like as an instructor, I've watched this dynamic take place in the room where the more open people are, the more willing they're to be transparent and vulnerable to those it impacts the community vibe of that space. Yeah,
and I've seen that definitely in my AP classes, like when I did it. Because like once you hit like AP, then that's like the level of students, like these are where the smart kids are. And you don't want to say anything.
Because you don't want to appear dumb.
Yeah. But then no one says anything, and then the teacher gets upset, and then every time you walk into class, it feels like a bad environment. Like you walk in, you just feel sick. And that's why like I stopped doing AP because I did AP Human Geography and then AP World History, and both of them like I just felt sick to my stomach because I didn't want to be perceived as dumb or but I didn't learn.
So there was a study years ago about where they took 2 control groups, right? 2 control groups. And this was a setting for the impact of affirmation on learning. And they took these 2 control groups. They gave them a test in this classroom setting. And the test was relatively easy. And so when they gave the test, they knew it was something that everybody in those control groups could pass. So in control group A, they went in and said like, hey, we just all want you to know, you all passed the test, flying colors. Incredible. I just want you to know, like, this is one of the smartest groups we've ever had. Like, you guys are obviously incredibly bright and incredibly intelligent. Now, that sounds encouraging, right?
Yeah.
That sounds affirming. Then they went to the other control group B, and they went in and said, hey, we want to let you know You all passed this test with flying colors. It is clearly evident you all are hardworking and incredibly studious. Now, those are both encouraging.
Yeah.
The question is one was complimenting an ability. Mm-hmm. The other was complimenting a character quality. So then they gave them a second set of tests, which they knew were outside of their reach. Like they knew this was way harder than before and was going to be incredibly challenging to them. So they gave them the test. They said, you don't have to do this, but you're here if you wouldn't mind stepping in. Group A, nobody took the test. Do you know why? Their fear was that their reputation of being smart would be ruined by taking that test. Because when they looked at it, they're like, I don't know what this is. And if I'm one of the smarter ones,
I don't want to take it.
And I fail this, then I'm not one of the smarter ones. So Group A never took the tests. Group B was like, we'll dive in. We're hardworking.
That's good.
We have a desire to kind of press into these things. And so, again, this is why, so there's the shoulder to shoulder, there's the head to head, right? So the head to head is not about like, it's about an environment where everybody kind of has that appetite to want to learn and grow.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm talking about. Which, side note, one of the outcomes of that study was the type of encouragement and affirmation leadership provides will dictate outcomes. So if you want to change the outcomes of your folks, investigate how you're encouraging, how you're affirming them. Because we all think that encouragement and affirmation is just the key. It's like, no, there's two types of encouragement and affirmation. There's probably more than that. But, one is like, are you encouraging and affirming what they can do, or are you encouraging and affirming who they are? And those are fundamentally different things and produce different outcomes.
That's true.
Okay, so shoulder to shoulder, head to head. Third is heart to heart. So this is how are we healing and dreaming together. So the focus is on, in that environment, is where it's probably a relatively small group of folks, but where these are people who know my hurts. They know how I've been betrayed or how I've been honored in the past. They know maybe what my weaknesses are, my struggles. They know what I'm hoping for in the future, where I want to go in my life. They probably know my family's extended family, kids' names, or my siblings' names, or my pets' names, or you know what I mean? They know where I went on vacation. They know where I'm hoping to go on vacation. They know these things about one another.
And it's layers and layers of time and relationship building.
Yeah, well, it could be time. So there's an interesting quality to that, right? Because for the heart to heart, it's either consistent time over an extended period of time, or consistent time over what's the right word for it? Over an extreme amount of time. So it's extreme or extended, right? So extreme meaning, like I got really close to a lot of folks at my last command because I was on a ship, and we weren't around, like we were around each other so much, but for a short period of time that we got to know one another really, really well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We didn't have to know each other for 5 years to get to that point,
right.
or 3 years. We knew each other for 3 months. But because it's a 24/7 thing, the nature of the missions we had, the environments we found ourselves in, the extreme, how extreme that was, shaped that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is where there's folks that I've traveled on mission trips with too, that I didn't know these people before we went on the mission trip, and then something happens through that unique, distinct experience that is at that heart level. It's different than shoulder to shoulder, head to head. There's something, we exposed our souls to one another in that environment. That was really, really good. Okay, so here's my proposal, right? When it comes to these things, when you think of your best friends, you had all three of those things going on in your lives with them.
Yeah.
I would argue that probably if somebody's struggling to find really good friends, like best friends,
Yeah.
it's because one or two of these things is missing. So they're saying, I'm going to Bible study. I don't feel like anybody knows me. Well, if that's all you're doing, that's just head to head. Probably. Most Bible studies are just head to head. Or, wow, these are a group of friends. We go out and have drinks with one another and go to the movies and do these activities and share this hobby. Well, that's shoulder to shoulder. If that's it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you got a transition coming up.
I do.
Right? You've been through a few transitions. So as you think about where you're going, stepping into this new college environment, college life, you're out on your own, looking into kind of going, okay, what is it? Where am I going to practice shoulder to shoulder, head to head, heart to heart? What I would encourage folks is that generally speaking, we have a tendency to gravitate towards one of those at the expense of the others. So like me, I gravitate towards head to head.
Yeah.
I would rather grab coffee with somebody and talk about questions I had than go play a softball game. Do you know what I mean? Or, open up my soul to them.
Yeah.
I would rather learn and grow with somebody than the other two. That's my default.
Yeah.
There's other people that, I don't know if you've ever been around those people where like you meet them and they overshare right out of the gate. Oh yeah, well, here's where I was from and this is what hurt and this is what that person did to me. And what are they sharing in that moment? Shoulder to shoulder, head to head, heart to heart.
Like heart to heart.
Heart to
but
heart.
I'm not in that place of receiving it.
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
so what happens in that moment to a sense of community?
It feels really awkward.
Very awkward. And that's the tension with all of these things, is that the expectations have to be in the same place.
Yeah.
So like one of the things that drives me nuts is if we're all supposed to be stacking chairs at church and two people are off in the corner talking, it drives me bananas. Do you know why?
Because you could help.
Yeah, because we're supposed to be stacking chairs right now, right? Like it's not shared intensity around the same objective.
Yeah.
It's intensity in a different objective, which is actually fracturing community right now.
Yeah.
Instead of making it cohesive. And so I would say, as people kind of look at how do I build an intentional community in my life? Or not build? We must discover. Like, how do I discover intentional community? I would say, like, think through those environments. What is your shoulder to shoulder, your head to head, heart to heart? What are those places? And then, are your expectations in the right place in those environments? And once I realized like, oh, I can go hang out with a bunch of folks and we can do a bunch of things and it's fine. It like doesn't need to be head to head or heart to heart. We're just doing this thing. All of a sudden I wasn't frustrated that it wasn't more than that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, no, this is what it was. It might be all it is, but that's better than nothing. So here we go. And ideally, man, if you could get two of those three, you're moving in a great direction. If you can get all three of those three, that becomes something that's a challenge. So what does that look like? How could you cultivate that? Which might mean you have to step into some experiences you would rather avoid.
Yeah. I know for me, like, I have school, head to head.
Yeah.
Work, shoulder to shoulder, and church is more heart to heart mixed with head to head. And it's all because my parents pushed me to do those things. It's not like I came into Virginia and was like, I got a job right away. I did this, that, and the other. It took time for me to get the encouragement and my ducks in a line. And it's not, and I feel like that's what a lot of people fear when they move. They're like, I have to restart everything. And Yes and no. Like you're moving into you're in a different environment than you used to. But you've seen how you've done it in the past.
Mm.
And so how can you like reconnect that now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and it takes like those, what are you remembering and how are you choosing to re-engage that today?
Well, and I think to your point, like knowing how to do this to discover meaningful community, it's a skill.
Yeah.
Which means you can learn it.
Yeah.
But it's also perishable, which means you can lose it.
Mm.
So, like, how do you get better at that skill? And I think for some folks that I have somebody in my mind particularly, they've always kind of lived in a particular area their entire life, and community has always been provided to them. They were sent to school. They were taken to church. They lived with their family. Then they lived down the road from their family. Do you know what I mean? Like, community was always kind of presented to them, and they were invited into that, or it was assumed that they would be a part of it.
Yeah.
But then as those things begin to fade, they're not in school anymore. Their family isn't at the same church, and they don't go to the same church as their family. They didn't move, but their family did move. All of a sudden, these things are no longer available to them, and they're going, I'm desperately lonely. And it's like, well, a part of me is like not surprised because you never developed the skill to intentionally
and
cultivate community for yourself.
I would also like say there are military kids. I had a friend who lived in Spain 9 years and everyone moved except them. And the environment hasn't changed. The buildings haven't changed. The mile marks or like the community like itself looks the same.
Yeah. The store is still the store. The post office is still the post office. Yeah.
Work still work. School still school. But community, like the people themselves are different.
Yeah.
And it's hard to like rebuild something they're already familiar, like in a familiar place.
Sure.
And that brings a whole other level of different complexities and different things to bring to the table. But
and that's where there's a thing called curse of knowledge. Have you ever heard of that phrase, the curse of knowledge? So the curse of knowledge is when you don't know what it's like to know something, or you don't know what it's like not to know. So what's my name?
Milo.
Have you ever not known that?
No.
So therefore, you don't know what it's like not to know my name. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so, like, anytime you learn something and you live with that knowledge for a little bit, all of a sudden you are no longer in a place to be able to to empathize with ignorance. So, because
Yeah.
like think of that Spain situation or any place where you live for an extended period of time. Hey, where'd you get that? At the Nex. Now, you and I say Nex. Do we know what we mean?
Yes. Our lingo.
Yeah. Do you think other people know what that means?
No.
Who are the only people that probably know what that means?
People who have either been there or know what it stands for.
Yeah, and in particular, it's a military thing. And so I say it, you can picture the logo in your mind, what the sign looks like, and all of these different things. But if you're unfamiliar with like I was unfamiliar with any of that before I joined the military, if somebody would say, "Yeah, we're going to the Nex," I would what's a Nex, right? Yeah. Is it an amusement park? Is it a museum? Is it a I don't know? Is it a gas station? Like what is? Did you say Nex or next? Like I don't know what these words are coming out of your mouth, right? Like I don't know what that means. Well, to your point, if you've lived in an environment where you are one of those constant things and everything else has changed, you suffer from the curse of knowledge. Because now you don't know what it's like for them not to know those things.
Yeah.
And then that's where it kind of go back and listen to, if you haven't listened to last week, we talked about the quality of practicing hospitality.
Yeah.
Hospitality fights against the curse of knowledge because it assumes you don't know. So when, it's always a little awkward. I always find it awkward anyway. When I go to somebody's house for the first time and they're like, hey, it's like, I have to use the bathroom. I don't know if I want to ask.
Where is it? Maybe I'll find it myself. Or like,
it's like this really, and then they're like, oh yeah, go, just go up the stairs and it'll be the first door on your right. And it's like,
it's really awkward.
It's awkward, right? Because it's not awkward to them, but if you're new, because you are ignorant, you don't have that knowledge, you don't have that experience. Hospitality does this. This is actually something they used to do at Walmart. I don't know if they still do this. It was like part of their policy that if you went to a Walmart employee and said, hey, can you show me where the motor oil is? You could be over where the carrots are being sold, which is on the opposite end of the store. They will walk with you or find somebody to walk with you to show you where the motor oil is. And the idea is what's more important right now is not stocking the shelf. What's more important is that you find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so, because what they're doing is they're fighting against that curse of knowledge. Like, oh, yeah, just go to aisle 14. Where's freaking aisle 14? Oh, it's on that end. It's over that way. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, oh, great. And it's not that they're being rude or indifferent. They just know. And when you know, you don't know what it's like not to know. I'm kind of echoing. I'm expounding upon what you said. Probably way more than I should. But this idea of like living with that curse of knowledge when if you can flip that, like if you find yourself in that place where everything's changed around you except you, well, now you know, how could you use that as a gift of hospitality to other folks?
Yeah.
To help cultivate community. Okay, so
cool.
I would say think of your different environments, head to head, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. Where could you connect with folks in those different ways? Maybe not like you did in the past. You might have to look at new things, new opportunities, new ways to be able to do that today, and then step into those things where it's appropriate and recognize that generally speaking, those things start really broad and then narrow down. So your heart to heart is probably going to be 3 or 4 people versus your shoulder to shoulder could be with 150 people. Do you know what I mean? Like it could be a really broad thing to a very, very narrow thing. And head to head is probably somewhere, 24 folks or whatever it is. So the idea is to step into those environments where you can learn about how to, take advantage of the distinct opportunity that exists in that environment to cultivate community. Okay. So now we have some questions
yes.
to ask. And so again, like last podcast, we talked about the identifying the qualities of the community we want, just talked about the stepping into these different environments. So we're going to wrap up now with this idea of being candid with yourself as you begin this discovery process. And so we have a list of questions here. Do you want to read this paragraph for us real quick?
Yeah. It's easy to identify the truths we need to live by. But what will I change today to live those truths? Consider the following questions below and begin thinking through your next steps in discovering a healthy community God has given you.
Okay, so this is, and by the way, this is all information that you can go to the show notes and download the PDF for this, where we lay all of this out for you, kind of in a worksheet type format.
Yeah.
No, not just for you. Hopefully, maybe there might be somebody you say like, "Hey, listen to this. Work on the worksheet. Let's get together, or at least talk through these questions with one another." You want to read that first question for us?
What have been the obstacles or my obstacles to finding a healthy community?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want to forget them.
Yeah.
You want to forget all the obstacles because it's like you don't want to set your mind on what you were sacrificing, the pain you went through, all that, because you just want to live in the happy moment. And when you step out of and going into a new one, and then those obstacles keep happening, if you actively think about that before you step into it, you know how to combat it. I'd say it prepares you to combat what's about to occur.
That's really well said, because I think so. I think one of the fears of stepping into any kind of community is looking like an idiot.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but like no one really cares though.
Nobody does.
Yeah.
But let's say you step into a community and you're afraid of being made an idiot, and then people make you feel like an idiot.
Mm.
Like they actually do it. You know, kind of Mean Girls type thing, right?
Okay.
You know, they like are intentionally unkind.
Mm.
That happens.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, well, what's my obstacle? My obstacle is fear. Not everybody's like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I sense that fear when I go into these places. Okay, well, what can I do to overcome that fear?
Yeah.
What are those obstacles? Has my calendar gotten too full? Have I not set myself up to discover these things? We're going to talk about this in a future podcast about how to find a church.
Which I'm excited for.
Yeah. And because, you know, when we moved to North Carolina, we visited 9 churches before we found the church we ended up attending. And it was a much more difficult process than I anticipated. And so we had to, you know, there was a little bit of us sitting back and going, okay, what's keeping us from finding a church? Is there something we need to change? Is there a different, I don't want to take away from what we're anticipating with that, but we had to kind of ask that question, you know, if I sit down with this group of folks, are my expectations in the right place? Or, you know, is that an obstacle? Yeah. So what have been my obstacles to finding a healthy community? So lay that out, right? Be honest with yourself. And I like the word candid, because candid is sort of that, like, just get it out there, lay it out. Second is, who can guide me to a healthy community? So who do you look at that you go, they're doing it right? They seem to have a lot of people around them. Maybe it's because they've lived in an area for a while. Maybe it's because their personality type just lends itself to, they're able to do that. Because I think there can be some personality types that lend themselves to finding community quicker. It could be a set of family values. It could be a variety of things. So who do you know that is doing it well? And I would say, if you're like, I don't know anybody, then again, I would, like, anytime you come up to I don't know, pray about it. Because God has a community for you that he wants you to discover. So who's already in your life that maybe you haven't thought about that could lead you into that next thing?
Yeah. Yeah, and then another one would be like, when will I explore what healthy community looks like now?
And this is get out your calendar and look at the calendar. I think there's a tremendous amount of community that can be discovered and experienced through a church. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying attending services or formal events is a way we'll plug that hole, because I think that's not an appropriate expectation. But I will say that, you know, and I didn't realize this, to be honest with you. I didn't realize the value of being in a room with a bunch of other people that shared my values. Like, as a pastor, where I'm the one up front teaching, and it wasn't until I wasn't a pastor and I realized how much my soul needed to be in a room with people that they believed the Bible, they believed in Jesus, they believed in the work of the Holy Spirit, they believed, you know what I mean? These things that they believed in the sanctity of marriage. They believed in this is an appropriate way to raise our kids. Here's how we're supposed to treat one another. Yeah. This is how we're supposed to think about life. Like, you know, there might be disagreements on how you express those things, but kind of the general principles we all agree upon. I didn't realize how much I needed that in my life on a consistent basis. So I'd say if you're not plugged into a healthy church, plug into a healthy church as a first step in finding healthy community. Mm-hmm. Again, don't have the expectation that if I show up on Sunday morning, that's enough. That's not enough. You're going to have to press more from there. So, but when are you going to do that?
Yeah.
When is that, on a Sunday? Is that a Wednesday night? Is that when is it going to fit onto your calendar?
Again, like, who are you going to talk to? Because nothing gets you more plugged into a community than serving.
That's true.
Like you need to find, like, I'm not.
Which is a what? Is that shoulder to shoulder, head to head, or heart to heart?
I'd say heart to heart.
Oh.
Head to head, too. It could be all three.
It could be all three.
It could be.
I would say it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
But I would say, if you're greeting people as folks walk in, that's a shoulder to shoulder activity, right?
Yeah.
So you're parking cars. If you're teaching like in the kids ministry, that may be head to head.
And then if you're having discussion like we do in our youth group, that's a heart to heart.
That could be a heart to heart. If you're helping lead worship, that would be, probably it could be maybe in all three, depending on the makeup of that team, right? So there's these different places. And again, I would say like bring this framework into those environments and align your expectations appropriately.
Right.
Because if I expect heart to heart, but it's a head to head type of environment, I'm going to be frustrated. So order your expectations appropriately.
Yeah.
So, look at when's this going to happen? It's not just going to magically happen. You're going to have to put it on the calendar, which means there's going to have to be probably some things you're going to have to say no to. So what are you going to have to say no to in order to move towards that healthy community? What are the boundaries you're going to have to set up for yourself so that you can say, no, this is, I can't do that and step into healthy community. And that's, to be honest with you, this is one of the things, and I know there's lots of good people that disagree with me on this, but this is where I think we're doing a disservice to our kids. When we're running them around to a gazillion sporting events or extracurricular activities, which is generally speaking all head-to-head or shoulder-to-shoulder type stuff, or we're pushing them in academic areas at the expense of shoulder-to-shoulder or heart-to-heart, like an extreme in any of these areas will make you anemic in building meaningful community. And in fact, I was just reading a study recently that said like travel sports and all of this kind of stuff is creating unnecessary anxiety in children because the focus is so much on performance instead of play that the desire to perform is creating elements of anxiety and depression. When play releases endorphins and it doesn't have the same effect. It actually is it's a natural antidepressant. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And so I grew up, there was travel ball when I grew up, but that was like for the super elites. But I grew up, when we played basketball and baseball, I mean, there was some leagues, but when the leagues weren't in play, we played in the side yard or in the driveway, or like we just played pickup ball with our friends and stuff. There's some of the best memories I have growing up was doing those kind of things.
Yeah.
We're getting away from that as a culture. And my concern is we are not setting our kids up for healthy success because unless somebody else is organizing it, there's not a community that's there. Right. So where are those places of community that I can step into or that I can just bring others along with me to have fun, to play with one another, to discover new ideas with one another, like in this playful sort of way. It doesn't have to be so serious and all focused. Again, like I have a tendency to move that direction, but it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
Like when I think of some of my best friends, like they make me laugh. Like very few people can make me laugh.
Like it's if I can make him laugh the way he talks to his friends, I've like hit a milestone. It's not that laugh.
It's not this laugh?
It's not that laugh.
Okay, so you want to, and then so what am I going to have to say no to, and then what?
What do I have to say yes in order to move forward into a healthy community?
Yeah. So
it does require negotiation. And negotiation is not necessarily comfortable because you might be comfortable with what your weekly rhythm is, monthly rhythm is. But is that providing you, is that what is best for you out of getting everything out of the community you need?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Comfort, like if you look at that list of, I have a bias against the word comfort right now. If you look at that, in the previous podcast, when we laid out the identifying the qualities, the word comfort is not laid out anywhere in here.
Yeah.
comfort and pleasure. And I'm not saying comfort and pleasure are bad things. God invites us to rest, which is comfortable. He invites us to enjoy what he's provided, which is a pleasurable experience, right? So I'm not saying those things are to be avoided. I'm saying those aren't the bullseyes. Those are the fruit. They are the byproduct. They are the result of living these things out in an intentional way.
Yeah. Like I would say, if you're choosing to, after Sunday, go home and watch football and prepare for the football game, get the snacks, get the food, prepare your afternoon after just church, you leave right away so you can make it for the game. You might have to say no to that in order to see how God can move you in other people's lives at church.
Or, yeah. And, so yes, or
be hospitable.
Bring people along with you.
Yeah.
Get home to the ball game and have friends over.
Yeah.
Like turn it into a community event. Turn it into an event that is shared with others. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I see people settling either for busyness, which is a whole topic I don't want to get into right now. Which has become a virtue in our society. And there's nothing in Scripture that calls us to be busy people. Nothing. And so having your calendar full and being busy is not a mark of a responsible, formative Christian life. It is a mark that you may be not pressing into. It could be a mark of you not pressing into the pace God has for you. And if the pace God sets for you, I'm not going to say all the time because there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, will always set you up to enjoy community that will cultivate your relationship with him, strengthen your resolve within the life of the church, and be of benefit to the community, larger community that you are part of. That will always be an effect when people are part of a healthy community. And we are living in a time, as we said at the top of the podcast, like we're living in a time when people are starved for it. And what they don't necessarily need are more events in their life.
Yeah.
They don't need more busyness. They need more intentionally focused relationships. Friend of mine's writing a book. I won't say who it is because it's a little bit under wraps, but he has this great line where he says, we are in a relationship recession right now. And he's writing on that topic of how do we overcome this? In fact, we've been messaging each other articles and stuff like that we're reading along these lines. But my point being, those of us that follow Christ, we're already tapped into a network.
Yeah.
That can see this resolved. Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, let's just reread it.
Okay. You want to reread? I'll let you reread it.
Cool. So you want to be candid to yourself and begin the discovery process. So here are the questions that we've asked. What have been my obstacles to finding a healthy community? Remember that. Who can guide me to a healthy community? When will I explore what healthy community looks like now? What do I have to say no to in order to move into a healthy community? And then what do I have to say yes to in order to move into a healthy community?
And like I said, this is all, you can download a PDF with all this information on it. And if your thought is, okay, I'll work on this by myself, it's fine.
Pray about it.
But I would encourage you to find somebody to work through this with.
Yeah.
Like, who is that you could say, like, hey, let's work on this, grab a cup of coffee. Some of the people I would hang out with, it would be like, let's grab a cigar and talk through this and discuss, like, how do we do this in a way that's purposeful and meaningful? All right, kiddo.
Yeah.
Glad we pressed into this.
Me too.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening. We're glad you're plugging into this podcast. We've got some great stuff coming up. We've got some episodes behind us. If you haven't had a chance to dive into the rest of them, email us.
Yeah.
And let us know if there's a topic we haven't hit yet. If you have any ideas on topics, that'd be great.
We'd love to look at that.
We'd love to get your ideas. We've got lots of ideas, but
Yeah.
we also want to hear from our audience and hear what you guys got going on. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter by visiting thisresilientsoul.com. You'll see the place where you can sign up for that and receive our monthly email that will highlight some of the stuff we got coming up and some different things going on in the life of this podcast. We're building up a really solid community of folks that are listening to this, which is incredibly humbling. It's super exciting to see how God is using this. And so we're grateful that you've taken the time to listen. As we said, if you want to reach out to us directly, you can email us at hello@thisresilientsoul.com. We're always looking for ways to deepen the quality and expand the impact of this podcast. So if you have some ideas on how we can do that, we welcome your input. We appreciate you. We hope you find the community that God has for you. We want you to discover that. And so whatever we can do to help you along that journey, don't hesitate to reach out. Trust that you have a good day. Thanks for listening.